yeah.
Welcome back. It's time for the roundtable. They're already bickering. This week we heard good news from the Fed when it comes to the outlook for the overall economy, and a special bright spot when it comes to worker wages. Also this week, more good news for the housing market and more questions about whether some key business partnerships will survive the controversy surrounding Donald Trump. Joining us today, two of our regulars, Peter Marisi, professor of economics at the University of Maryland's Smith School of Business, and AP economics reporter Josh Boak. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us as always. Let me start with this Janet Yellen testimony before the House Financial Services Committee this week because it caught my attention. She was mainly there to talk about interest rates and when the Fed may see some easing of their control over them. But she pointed to wages as a bright spot in the economy. Peter, I know a lot of people who haven't felt that wages have been the bright spot. What point is she trying to make, and is it a valid one?
Well, if wages are rising, it's the equivalent of a worm getting from below a snake's belly on its back. I mean, they are rising, but not by a whole lot. And it could be very temporary. It's only happened for a few months now, so we have to really see more.
So Peter dubious, Josh, as am I. We're saying that even jobs are rising just enough to almost be back to what's considered a normal recovery. Is this really a bright spot?
There's no such thing as a normal recovery anymore after the Great Recession. We really have issues that go beyond the Federal Reserve regarding wages. That includes the fact that younger workers who earn less are coming into the market as older workers who earn more are leaving. That includes the fact that we have globalization. So we're competing against people who are paid lower wages, and we have automation. So a lot of those middle skill jobs disappeared during the recession, and they're not coming back.
Well, I don't want to take the silver lining and find the cloud. So clearly we are seeing some good news because in all of this, some of the best news we've been seeing of late is how much the national housing market is rebounding and the brisk sales that we've seen nationwide. And that is because younger workers are at least feeling more confident that they will have a job. And that is because we've seen interest rates very favorable to buying homes. Peter, will that last?
Oh, that will last, but let's be clear. The pace of buying houses and building houses and so forth is not like it's pre-recession level. I'm not talking about the prices. I'm talking about the pace. Now, there is a change in the structure, which is boosting construction, and that is young people like to live close to cities. So we're seeing a boom in apartment constructions, more than single-unit housing. That basically a change in preferences. People don't want to be in their cars as much, at least these young people.
Well, Josh, one of the bright spots we've certainly seen here, the Washington housing market never entirely went away, but we've always seen pockets of growth and then pockets of failure. Anacostia saw a 36% growth in housing prices in the last 3 months. That's astounding. That's an area that you've been looking at every year. What's your take on these numbers?
Well, this is the next stage in Washington, D.C. gentrification. Anacostia is close enough to the Nationals ballpark. More people are going near that area, so they're getting more comfortable with Anacostia. But more importantly, they're priced out of a lot of D.C. neighborhoods. Just like we talked about wage growth, incomes have not risen fast enough in D.C. to match the appreciation in homes. So naturally, you're going to have more people spread, and we're starting to see the limits of gentrification tested.
But Peter, for the families who have lived in Anacostia for generations and do own homes, for them to have this now increased value in their assets, does that compensate for gentrification then driving some of these very families out, or is it more loss than gain?
For them, no. Whenever you have gentrification, whenever you have redevelopment of a region, whenever city folk go to a recreational area far away that they hadn't before, land values go up and the people that are sitting there start to get priced out. But if we worried about that, we'd still be 1 or 2 million people pressed between the Appalachian Mountains and Tidewater.
We have to worry about that in this city. There is not enough housing for people, and there are people of all incomes, and unless we want to be a city that is only for the wealthy, then we have to worry about housing prices.
We're not going to be a city only for the wealthy, but there is going to be displacement, and then they are going to go to other housing. The thing is, this is a process of creative destruction. You cannot improve an area without raising its values. Now, if you want to outlaw raising its values, we can go back to rent control and have housing shortages and things of that nature.
But let's step back. I go through Anacostia every year. My wife and I walk through it, and one of the things you would see is a high level of foreclosures. So the families that historically lived in that neighborhood are not necessarily benefiting from the price appreciation. It's the developers and the people who are able to buy those properties at the cheap and make out.
So again, we can take the silver lining and find the cloud. Let's talk about the Donald, because we have talked about him for the last couple of weeks. He was unapologetic in our interview with him, as he has been in all other interviews, about making outrageous comments. When we talked to him, he was still focused on the Chinese, but now his comments about Mexican immigrants, he's unapologetic and yet still trying to succeed in business, and so far succeeding in business. Josh, you had an interesting conversation with Don Peebles, the real estate developer here in Washington, and he had some words of warning. What did he have to say?
Well, he said that if Trump continues on this course, where he makes these bombastic statements, he's eventually going to isolate the kind of government leaders that he needs to cooperate with him on these real estate projects.
Because he's talking about these public-private ventures. He's had several in New York, from concession stands to all kinds of other developments that help his real estate property. In Washington, his biggest one, GSA working in partnership with Trump to allow him to take over the old post office. He won't own it, but he's got a long-term lease to develop it. A lot of other hotels wanted it. Peter, is there a basis for government entities like the GSA for taking away a contract from a private developer?
Well, I think if you make racist remarks, yeah. I mean, some things step
legally, though?
Oh, I think that probably they can find a way. If the project becomes unviable, so they can't make money, there's going to have to be some kind of workout.
That's the loophole,
see,
I think,
this
as well.
is the thing. My feeling is the government should stop doing things like regulate speech, but rather the public, through its own actions, will regulate it by basically making it difficult for people to say and do dumb things to do business.
If it's a premier luxury hotel, will people still stay there regardless of whether or not it's a Trump property? People like luxury.
Look what happened with Beverly Hills and the Sultan of Brunei. People objected to what the Sultan of Brunei's government did regarding the homosexual population, and conferences and people staying at that hotel disappeared. The same thing could happen to Trump, particularly since he seems to have the kinds of statements that people usually associate with
President
North Korea.
Obama no longer staying at the Waldorf Astoria because it's now owned by the Chinese. There's all kinds of implications for owners.
I'd point out to you, you only have to lose 10 or 20% of your business to become unviable.
Good point. And now we got to take a break for the pop quiz. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's time for the pop quiz, and we were on the Donald. Let's stay on the Donald because the media site Huffington Post dropped him from their political coverage on Friday, saying he only belongs in the entertainment section. Josh spoke as a business right call, wrong call by the Huffington Post.
It accurately reflects the fact that political campaigns are increasingly like reality TV shows. And the problem with Trump is you don't know the difference.
Peter Maurice.
It's absolutely wrong. The press should not be picking our candidates. If he registers in the poll and gets on the ballots, he's a candidate. It's just like the New York Times refusing to acknowledge Ted Cruz's top-selling book. I guess you have to be a liberal.
I agree with Peter Maurice on the Trump.